We're bringing developing news
and the stories behind the headlines. This is Storycon. I'm Patrick Paez.
I'm Ed Lingao, and some stories we're watching this Friday, June 21. Happy weekend. 4 People's Liberation Army Navy vessels were spotted within 12 nautical miles of Palawan on June 19. That's according to the AFP. The AFP says that upon challenge, the ships, and we quote, responded accordingly. The military adds that this area in Palawan is commonly used by international vessels passing through Philippine waters. The NBI Cybercrime Division has arrested 3 people for allegedly hacking private and government websites. These include systems of the National Security Council and the Armed Forces of the Philippines. One of those arrested is supposedly connected to a media organization, the Manila Bulletin. However, the outlet assured, and we quote them, utmost fidelity to the law.
And the Presidential Anti-Organized Crime Commission has formally filed a complaint against suspended Bambang Mayor Alice Go. Go is facing the non-bailable offense of qualified trafficking in persons. Several others are facing the same charges, including former Technology and Resource Center Chief Dennis Cunanan. The complaint against the accused stems from their alleged links to illegal pogos.
And here's a special report on a call from experts for a new approach to global health funding. One News editor Jovenel Francisco has the story.
Barely a month after the proposed pandemic treaty was shelved during the World Health Organization's annual assembly in Geneva, members of the panel that worked on the proposed accord swiftly renewed calls for leaders to unite and prepare for the next pandemic. As monkeypox continued to spread in Central Africa and the bird flu now affecting mammals, igniting fears of imminent human-to-human transmission, experts warn the world would most likely be overwhelmed by any new pandemic threat. This was underscored by members of the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response during a virtual forum attended by journalists from across the globe. Panel co-chairs and former world leaders, Liberia's Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and New Zealand's Helen Clark, led the release of an important report. This after the WHO Assembly failed to pass a pandemic treaty that has been in the works since 2021, when the world was battling COVID-19. The panel's postscript is scathing and instructive at the same time. They criticized officials who wasted the learnings from the recent pandemic, but also noted that political leaders play an important role in making sure the next generation will be better prepared during a pandemic.
Obviously, leadership needs to be applied to preventing disasters, not just responding to them.
So while we learn lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic, I think the more enduring insight or even wisdom is to expect the next pandemic to be different from COVID-19. We need to be prepared for the worst case scenario, meaning the next pandemic could be as severe as SARS and as transmissible as an influenza virus. When that happens, and we accept that in a pandemic, our common mission as healthcare jurisdiction is to minimize deaths.
While the panel still hopes a treaty will be approved, they presented other suggestions in the meantime, like more transparency and trust among countries, a new approach to global funding when a pandemic spreads.
On the issue of financing, we and others have estimated that you need at least that 10 to 15 billion every year to support low and middle income countries to strengthen preparedness. We say it should be additional to official development assistance, A, because there's not much of it, and B, because it addresses a global common good. We continue to advocate a global public investment model for this, where everyone pays in and country allocation is according to need.
A more equitable access to vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. A formal group of world leaders focused on pandemic preparedness and even the possibility of splitting the WHO into 2 functions, with one zeroing in solely on health emergencies.
And we posed an open question, and I stress it is an open question, should WHO be split into 2 organizations? One that is focused on emergency operations as that work has to be done, and one that's focused on operational and technical excellence in health. Both are important and need focus.
The WHO recently amended its international health regulations and calendared the approval of the pandemic treaty within the next year. But in the meantime, it is being stressed that cooperation from world leaders is imperative to ensure the protection of 8 billion people. Jovi Francisco, we are One News.
And of course, joining us today, geopolitical analyst Richard Hidarian.
Bakit nag-reverse lang yata kami nung isang kasama natin? Parang teleport. Kamusta po?
Yung nag-teleport yun,
Matulog na po!
Storycon, resident political pundit, Mr. Tito Ronald Llamas.
Anong oras na pa?
Anong ginagawa dyan nung tunay na political pundit ng One News?
ang pandit na kuratsa.
Kuratsa
Walang
talaga.
pahinga. Walang pahinga. Tuloy-tuloy lang.
Lagari.
Lagari talaga.
Iba ibig sabihin ng kuratsa nung 80s eh. Walang pahing kuratsa.
Parang gano'n.
Let's not go there.
That's not good. I know.
Baka maano tayo.
Pero,
Baka mamagpo tayo.
yung integridad ni Ronald, that's beyond unassailable.
Unassailable.
Teflon yan.
Nako,
Yan.
parang papuri yun.
Okay, so nandito kayong dalawa. Isa lang ibig sabihin yan. West Philippine Sea pa rin tayo. Right?
Ako po.
So what else do we need to unpack? I mean, the other day, I think it was yesterday, we had Ray Powell here. Tinanong ko siya kung totoo ba na parang may digression in policy between the National Security Council and the Defense Department. May parang hindi pagkakasundo. Kaya nangyari doon sa Ayungin incident. So, first of all, how credible is this, Ronald? Or like Ray Powell said, it's normal that within the administration, you have people who disagree.
Well, hindi naman tayo Communist Party ng China. Hindi naman tayo People's Liberation Army na walang demokrasya sa bansa na yon. So, madaling sabihin na isa lamang ang kanilang direksyon. No? Sa atin ay kinakailangan ng mga consultation, kinakailangan ng mga meeting dahil wala tayong isang presidente na president for life. Kaya nakikita rin dito yung, in a positive note, nakikita rito yung mga hindi differences, kundi yung mga debate in terms of strategy at saka tactics. No? Kaya ang packaging dyan ng mga kalaban ay hati-hati kayo, nag-aaway-aaway kayo. Mukhang hindi naman. No? Mukhang hindi naman. Ito kasi yung one of the few times na yung ating NABSOG o yung Naval Special Operations Group ay nasalang dito sa pag-supply ng BRP Sierra Madre. Huwag natin kalimutan na itong mga differences na mga tactics na ito ay in response dun sa scaling up ng China para harangin yung ating simpleng pag-supply sa about 24 soldiers natin sa BRP Sierra Madre. Huwag natin kalimutan, baka maligaw tayo eh. Itong mga differences in terms of tactics ay naghahanap tayo ng tamang kombinasyon para mabigyan natin ng supply yung ating mga sundalo sa BRP Sierra Madre.
Okay,
at makita natin dito na grabe yung response ng China dito sa pangyayaring ito. No? Kaya ako, mas doon ko tinitignan, Patrick, yung pangyayari. Rather than pagkakaiba ng mga strategiya at saka taktika ng ating armed forces.
Okay, but I'd like to ask Richard here, no? Do you think that the use by Navy SEALs of the Defense Department or the AFP, should we take that as an indication that the AFP is increasingly impatient with measured transparency and they feel that it doesn't work?
Well, it's inevitable, no? We were in an unprecedented situation kung saan after almost 6 years of quiet diplomacy, if I can put it politely, under President Duterte. Now, essentially, you have a complete green light for the Philippines to assert its claim. So, medyo siguro atat yung iba, medyo may pent-up frustration built over those years.
Is it working,
medyo
Richard? Is measured transparency working?
ganito na lang, my understanding of everything that has happened right now is necessary but not sufficient. Right? I think may value yung mutual defense treaty natin with the US, kaya nga hindi pa rin tayo binabaril ng mga Chino. I think may value in transparency initiative in the sense that it highlights what a bully China is. But as things stand, obviously they're not sufficient to prevent this kind of situation whereby completely binubuli tayo ng China. And the optics is not good for China, but it's also not very inspiring for the Philippines.
Yeah.
So clearly something has to change. Ang tanong kasi dito is, when you talk about tactical changes, because the strategy has been set by President Marcos Jr. already, magkakaroon talaga ng hidwaan yan, magkakaroon talaga ng disagreements yan, because we are in really uncharted territories here. And you can see even the Chinese are also scrambling and trying to wonder what is their own Goldilocks level of bullying whereby it comes short of activating the Mutual Defense Treaty. I'm sure there are also tensions between us and our friends abroad, particularly the Americans, in terms of, eto bang Mutual Defense Treaty, yung guidelines na, do we have to revise the guidelines to make it relevant to a gray zone? Because I remember very well, I was writing something about this yesterday. I went back to my notes. In 2019, nung nangyari yung Reed Bank, then Ambassador Sung King said that the MTT should also apply to militia attacks, gray zone attacks. And then Secretary Pompeo, he released a policy paper in middle of around this time in 2019 whereby sinabi niya, while neutral sila dun sa status of disputed land features, pagdating dun sa mga atolls or shoals like Second Thomas Shoal na nasa loob na ating exclusive economic zone, they stand with us in terms of exercising our exclusive economic zone rights. Meaning, pagdating sa Second Thomas Shoal, may level of commitment din ng US. Not to mention, may troops tayo dyan. So, cover talaga yan ng MDT. So, ang tanong ngayon is, how do you tweak the MDT, especially the guidelines of MDT, to make it relevant also to gray zone attacks? Napaka-aggressive na ganito.
I think Ed is going to pull up something and show us that, in fact, it has been revised, right? Ed?
So, Richard, this is something we pulled from the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command website. This is a legal guidance or briefing paper for the Indo-Pacific Command as of October 2023, last year.
And it was reported by the Indo-PACOM commander to the U.S. Senate. Okay?
And
this is an update.
this is specific pa nga prepared specifically for the Sierra Madre and Second Thomas Shoal.
Right.
So it's quite applicable. What's really interesting is dito sa bandang page 3. Let's go straight to dun sa U.S. defense commitments to the Philippines. This is how they now interpret the MDT at least as of September last year. Okay, the position is clear of the U.S. As reaffirmed. Armed attack. Okay. But what qualifies as armed attack?
Yun ang issue ko eh. The armed attack, it creates a very high threshold.
Yeah.
But they're more specific now. They've defined it.
Okay. Okay. Teka, where is that? What constitutes
It's
an
not
armed attack?
defined, but as a matter of international law.
The U.S. has long taken the position that armed attack applies against any illegal use of force. Now, how do you define illegal use of force? Not limited by law to kinetic armed attack or the use of munitions. In other words, even if you don't use munitions, it's non-kinetic, it can qualify as illegal use of force and therefore an armed attack.
My problem is that this is not as clearly reflected in the statements we're seeing from Blinken, from President Biden. And all.
Right.
President Biden always stops at this level. So this level is not clarified. Kaya sabi ko, 2019 pa lang, there was already push for some revisions in the guidelines. We're not talking about provisions.
Nagbago na, Richard.
So,
this is clear.
But the problem
Baka
is...
hindi pa lang inaamin ni
That's my
Blinken
problem.
at saka
You don't see this kasi this is the most important. Na yung definition of armed attack also applies to any illegal use of force, and any illegal use of force
Not limited to
is
kinetic.
almost meeting what we're seeing right now.
Yes,
diba?
yes.
So my problem here is
Wait, before we proceed, Richard,
It's
I would
the
just like to
signaling is not clear.
let the audience appreciate what is meant by kinetic armed attack.
correct.
Meaning say, hindi kailangan magpaputok ng barel.
Yeah.
Right?
There.
Parang ganun, no?
Yeah. The use of munitions, that's what is referred to as kinetic. So it could also include non-kinetic attacks that result in death, injury, damage, or destruction. But mind you, again, this is U.S. Pacific Command, this is the military.
Right.
In the end, it's a political decision.
it's a political decision. That's why you want to hear this from the State Department, Secretary Blinken. You
Yeah.
want to hear this also from President Biden. And you have to have certain intimations whereby what China is doing is almost meeting this. Because we can play a lawyer's game here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's
and
true.
say, oh, well, that still doesn't meet. at the same time, ang challenge kasi sa Amerika at saka Pilipinas is that you still have to have a certain degree of strategic ambiguity. Bakit nga mo? Because if you're super specific, then China says, ayun pala eh, so
Yeah.
pwede pa rin yung
Well,
mga kabila.
The
Right.
problem,
Goals.
Richard, is this document is super specific. And in fact, I'd like to point out, Ronald, that at the Shangri-La Dialogue, the President did mention that injuries of Filipino soldiers
Would cross the Rubicon.
Yeah, might lead the Philippines into invoking the treaty. Tinanong in that same forum si U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, he was more evasive on that matter. But at the same time, we have something on paper. Something like this.
So, hindi lang pala sa Pilipinas ang medyo may interagency.
Right. Hindi
Our friends also on the other side are also having probably some, clarification and alignment they have to do between the State Department position. Because you see, this was not coming out in the statements that Biden made during the trilateral summit. It stopped at here, dito sa taas. Kaya ako, I always said, there has to be clarification on any illegal use of force. We see that the level of the Indo-PACOM
And what we saw
operation
in
is not a level of policy.
and what we saw in Ayungin on June 17 is an example would fall under all of this. Right, Ronald? Illegal use of force,
Well,
non-kinetic,
yeah.
and resulting in a cut finger, an injury.
Yeah.
Right?
Actually, hindi lang dito nangyayari yan eh. Nangyari din dyan dun sa border skirmishes ng China at saka India. Kung maalala nyo, no, yung a few years back, nagkaroon ng ganyang klaseng
Alternative, yeah.
confrontation. Walang gumamit ng armas, walang gumamit ng kanyon, walang gumamit ng mga military assets at saka infrastructure. Ang gamit ay halos katulad na nakikita natin, mga pamalo, mga itak, no, mga sibat. No, yun yung naging confrontation. Yung mga initial confrontation between China and India, doon sa clashes na yun, walang casualties. Pero yung at a particular time, nagkaroon ng casualties. Merong 20 Indians yung namatay at may 4 na Chinese yung namatay. Pero walang kanyon, walang barilan. Ibig sabihin, yung ganitong klaseng clashes can also cause casualties beyond yung right thumb na naputol. No? Ang gusto ko lang pag-usapan ay yung sinasabi kanina, tinatanong mo, Patrick, whether nag-fail ba yung measured transparency. Dapat tignan natin yung measured transparency not as a strategy, as one component of a more sophisticated, more comprehensive strategy. No, yung measured transparency is part of a strategy. Hindi siya yung strategy. Yun ang dapat nating maunawaan.
Right.
No? Halimbawa, yung measured strategy is a cup half full, half empty. Meron siyang successes, pero meron din siyang limits. Katulad nga ng sabi ni Richard. Halimbawa, nasasaktan ng China dun sa cup half full. Yung pag-unite ng a large section ng mundo dun sa aggression, laban sa aggression ng China. No, G7, no, even NATO, EU, Quad, etc. ay sumusuporta sa atin. That is a success of measured transparency, of exposing yung aggression ng China laban sa isang napakaliit na bansa, napakaliit na military power katulad natin. No? Dapat makita nga natin yan. Pinakita nyo kanina, Ed, Patrick, yung mga presence ng PLA Navy battleships. Di ba? Na pinakita nyo kanina. Hindi na yan gray zone tactics. Hindi na yan yung dating sinasabi natin na cabbage strategy. Medyo nag-a-adjust din mismo yung China. Halimbawa, just yesterday, na-monitor na yung Shandong Carrier Strike Force ng China at lahat ng kanilang 055 battleships ay lahat ngayon papunta dito sa South China Sea. Ibig sabihin, yung buong South China Fleet ng China ay ngayon ay gumagalaw. Hindi natin kung ano yung kanilang objective. Yan ba ay long distance military exercises? Yan ba ay pag-scale up ng kanilang nakikitang possibility ng pag-invoke ng Mutual Defense Treaty? O yan ba ay reaction dun sa suporta sa atin ng buong mundo dito sa mga maliliit na insidenteng ito? Pero ang nakikita natin ngayon ay halos yung buong South China Sea ng China is moving. pwedeng bahagi yan ng kanilang scaling up at pambubuli, no, na nakita natin dito sa incident nitong June 17, no? Pwedeng yan ay reaction doon sa possibility na pag-invoke ng Mutual Defense Treaty. Parang winawarning na
But I
tayo.
think we have to
Huwag
clarify,
niyong
Ronald.
puntahan yan.
I think you cannot see it from there. That's why it was very clear, the fine print. No?
Yes.
This includes legal opinion analysis that does not necessarily reflect official U.S. government position.
There's
So
a
I see
caveat
this
there.
more as, I don't want to be dismissive, but it still looks to me like a recommendation paper rather than the final position of the Biden administration. And I'm not surprised by this because these debates were happening Trump time pa lang. Diba? I just mentioned 2019 pa lang. So nothing surprises me here. What I'm wondering is, will this be reflected as the final position of the Biden administration beyond? Because it's the caveats that counts to me. I know this is a game, this is a lawyer's game, right? So the caveats is what I always read. Kaya sabi ko, wait lang, basahin ko muna sa baba, nakita ko kagad, there is a big caveat there. So we have to put pressure on our friends. Okay, I know that you want to have strategic ambiguity, but this is more ambiguity than strategy because it's not 100% working. Tayo naman mga Pilipino, I think instead of fighting amongst each other and not appreciating what's there, we should look at what necessary new components we have to bring into the table.
Pero alam naman
should
natin,
the AFP
Christian, di ba? Richard, na itong mga nakasulat na ito do not necessarily govern the actuations of a superpower. No? Nakita natin sa kasaysayan, a lot of times, na yung mga fine print na nakasulat na yan, ay mismo yung gumawa niyan ay hindi niya sinusunod. Di ba?
Well, given na yan, but I'm just saying even this one has a caveat na it's not the final policy. You're saying even if final policy yan, hindi pa rin maasahan. Our point is, this is where we have to be careful when we deal with China. We have to make sure we got the backing of our Americans 100%. So instead of fighting among each other, I think we have to also make sure our American friends are also aligning with the realities on the ground in terms of parameters of the
Richard,
NDT.
let me ask you about something else. In 2012, there was a great degree of discomfort from the U.S. side as to how we handled Scarborough Shoal. If I recall correctly, parang at one point Kurt Campbell was saying, at least according to the Chinese, na parang, what are these Filipinos up to? Why are we getting dragged into Scarborough? Into a sovereignty issue. What are the chances that they're feeling the same thing now with what's happening in Ayungin?
Well, that was supposed to change, diba? I mean, Richard Fontaine, these are Center for New American Security folks. These are people who are part of the Washington staff. They have a new book called The Lost Decade, whereby they're blaming largely the Obama administration for not holding the line. Hindi lang sa Scarborough Shoal, pati yung sa reclamation na ginawa ng China from December 2013. Ang daming kakulangan. Kaya nga yung ginawa ng Trump administration to say, enough is enough. We have to have some clarity. Kaya nga Pompeo came here in 2019 and openly said, any attack in the South China Sea, hindi lang sa Pacific, public vessels will activate the Mutual Defense Treaty. Pero nakikita natin, ba't yan medyo kapos di ba? So ang ginawa ng Biden is they just carried over Trump to a certain degree, but still they have to build on this as the facts on the ground change. So medyo humahabol yung alyansa natin sa realidad
So
on
they
the ground.
drew a line on the water.
So my point is, thankfully, we're not in the Obama time. I told our American friends, never use the term that Obama used. Very inartful, in fact, very insulting. He said, we don't go to war over a bunch of rocks. Well, it's a bunch of rocks to you. It's part of our national... It was insulting. And I was really disappointed by Obama when he was here in 2014 to so dismissively talk about itong territorial disputes na yan. Thankfully, we're out of that. Pero hindi pa tayo 10 So we went from 0 to 5. Ang point ko is, let's get a 7, let's get a 8. So tama si Ronald, you'll never get 10.
Richard, what's 10? I mean, we're
10
talking
is-
about where we were,
Yeah.
where the U.S. was in 2012 to where the U.S. is now. So what's 10 to you? Is it is it conflict?
10 to me is the U.S. coming out and saying one more action similar to like that, we'll have a direct military.
Isn't that
We're
what-
not going to get that.
Haven't they
I
been
doubt we're
saying
gonna-
that with every ironclad statement?
No,
that they
ironclad
make?
is what I hear they say to Emiratis, to Saudis. In fact,
Exactly.
I'm allergic to the term ironclad. Come up with a better metaphor or better, I don't know, adjectives or other. So, ang problema sa Americans is, unless you force them and push them, look at what Zelensky is doing. He's not even their ally. And he just keeps on bludgeoning everyone. Hey,
Well,
ito
that's
naman
in
kami, ito
America's
lang.
interest, isn't it? To make sure that the fighting is done in Ukraine. and
Because
not in
Ukraine
Europe.
is beating the heck out of the Russians.
Yeah,
So
but
if we showed that we can...
sorry, Richard, but Ukraine is a damaged country. It's a wreck.
Yeah, but it was supposed to be actually fully occupied 2 years ago. So compared to what
Well,
would have happened,
the
right?
other option would have been
What,
allowing
surrender?
diplomacy-
Allow Russia to take
no,
over?
No, allowing diplomacy to
What would
kick
be-
in.
what would be diplomacy?
And prevented an invasion to begin with.
No, what would be the diplomacy?
Well, there were people who were arguing that invasion could have been avoided if it was guaranteed that Ukraine would remain neutral.
But Ukraine was neutral. No one in his serious mind would think that anyone wanted Ukraine inside NATO. Only Bush made some, flippant statement in 2008.
Wasn't Biden?
That's the Putin narrative.
Wasn't the Biden administration kind of teasing on that?
No. Biden was very clear. NATO is not. They said we cannot stop them from aspiring to be part of NATO, but that, of course, you cannot force a country to say, don't even dream for it. But
Biden could have said at that point, no.
I would say they
Actually, Patrick,
but to be honest, I think Putin was just looking for an excuse. He wanted to get Luhansk and Donetsk. The 2014 Maidan revolution, that was really the worry for Putin. So actually, I don't buy that argument. That's a Russian narrative. But could the US always do better? Of course they could do better. Ang point ko naman dito is, pagdating dito sa West Philippines, thank God, wala pa rin namatay, wala pa rin nangyari. So, we have to take that win and then work it from there instead of fighting among ourselves or fighting with our ally. But that means that hindi tayo pwede maging complacent. And now we have to look at the situation whereby we get closer to this definition when it comes to actual American foreign policy. So maybe it's very important for Blinken, for Lloyd Austin to tell their Chinese counterparts, this is not sustainable. Either we're going to be forced to come in or we're going to totally lose our credibility as a regional leader, supposedly.
But looking at scenarios, kasi...
Di ba yung din ang sinasabi ng China ngayon? Di ba yung din ang sinasabi nila? Parang yung hinihingi ngayon ni Putin sa Ukraine na we can have peace pero hatiin natin ang Ukraine. Di ba yung sinasabi niya? Nasa amin na yung Crimea, nasa amin na yung Donbas, pero we want more. So, we are open to having peace, pero hatiin natin yung bansa nyo. In a way, yun din naman ang sinasabi ng China, no? Na yan yung pinanggalingan ng ating mga tinatawag na secret agreement. May naniniwala ba sa atin na yung China ay aalis sa kanilang artificial islands? May naniniwala ba na yung China ay babaklasin yung kanilang billions of dollars ng artificial islands within our maritime territory, no? Wala namang naniniwala eh. So ang tanong dito, what is being offered to us? Ang sinasabi kasi ng mga talking heads ng China, magpan tayo, mag-scale down, no? Mag-scale down. Ano yung i-scale down natin?
Ronald,
we're just supplying a boat sa sarili nating maritime. Ang sinasabi ko, yung China, ang hihingi ng China is pure capitulation. Mag-capitulate tayo. Ibigay natin yung ating maritime territory sa kanila. Dahil 100% hindi aalis ang China dun sa mga islands na itinayo na nila.
Okay,
na meron
Ronald,
meron ng pantalan, meron ng fighter jets, meron ng missiles. No? So, linawin natin what we are asking.
Okay, but Ronald, this is also very important to take note that once upon a time, not too long ago, this administration's Department of Foreign Affairs used to say, I think the Secretary Manalo, who I guess we need to hear more from about, no? He used to say that West Philippine Sea is not the sum of our relationship with China. There are other things. It's not just those islands that we have to balance and consider.
Well, I mean, you have to have clear red lines, right?
Yeah.
Ibang ibig sabihin, ang ibig sabihin doon ay hindi usapin ito ng ibibigay natin yung West Philippine Sea sa China. Mukhang hindi yun. That was far from
I think what he meant to say was,
ibig sabihin.
Well, I think what he meant to say is to let diplomacy do its work because there are other stakes if we go down the rabbit hole with China.
What is diplomacy? Kasi what the Chinese are saying is, hayaan mo yung BRP Sierra Madre ay and to give away to give into the elements, right?
So we take over.
Kasi since we have documents from the Chinese more than 10 years ago saying all we need is hintayin lang natin ito, this thing will disintegrate on its own. Now, one thing I didn't mention a while ago is reports suggest, despite all of this, some could say kabuki show, some could say dangerous show, actually, na-fortify na natin, nagawa natin yung kailangan natin. Some of my metallurgic engineering friends would say, I'm not sure about that claim. But based on the reports we're saying this, while all of this, I don't know, kabuki show, we did what we had to do. So at least, I'm glad that ginawa natin kailangan natin on the ground because we cannot lose the second Thomas Scholl. We cannot lose yung position natin sa BRP Sierra Madre. So, it's not like kinakawawa lang tayo. It's not
sorry
like bugbog
sorry
lang
for
tayo.
the question, Richard. Why can't we lose? Why can't we lose second Thomas Scholl?
Well, why can't we just
Okay,
give
what's
give
there?
away?
What's there? What's there?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is well within our
they will
exclusive
establish
economic
their
zone. It's a low tide
territorial-
elevation.
Their territorial waters
Yeah,
based on that.
it's a low tide
Parang yung
elevation, so
ginagawa
it's not a
nila ngayon sa
territory to be
Sandy Cay
claimed.
1, 2, and 3. Pag nag-succeed sila doon sa Sandy Cay 1, 2, and 3, doon nila sisukatin yung kanilang territorial waters. Medyo game changer yun, Patrick. Ha? Kaya kung gagawin nila yan dito sa second Thomas Shoal, imaginein mo yung kanilang infringement even beyond our EEZ. No? Even papasok sa ating clear territorial waters. So, yun, hindi siya maliit na bagay. Hindi siya BRP Sierra Madre lang. Hindi siya simpleng ayungin lang. It is where they will establish another artificial island where they will measure their territorial waters.
And put weapon systems there.
Let me try to reframe the question. If we were to try to go the way of diplomacy, what are the options available to us without going down the road of acquiescence, complete acquiescence? I mean, if we talk, what could we put on the table? What could we get?
I always hear, let's learn from our neighbors. Let's learn. Well, the Malaysians unilaterally just developed oil and gas resources within areas claimed by China. China made noise. They sent ships. Blah blah blah. In the end, they had to accept the facts. And then Malaysia came in and did what Manalo said. But there's more to our bilateral relations. Let's talk about economics.
Richard.
No, so history tells you, if you stand your ground, after a while, China recalibrates. Then deals with a different
We've seen that.
equilibrium.
Learn from our neighbors. Our neighbors, yeah, you're right. Vietnam has put up a stand and...
For 1,000 years. So
Right. No? They're right down China. They're a neighbor of China down south. No, learn from our neighbors. If you will go by every statement that China has issued every time there's an incident, they have been accusing us of being of playing into an American strategy in the South China Sea.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
My question is, maybe we should stand up alone rather than hoping that America will come to our defense.
Well, my point is the reason why...
Maybe that's a problem of China. It's the biggest problem of China is that maybe they're not respecting the way we stand up to them.
Well, my point here is, kung sana binigyan ng chance yung ginagawa ni Pinoy na hindi nagkaroon ng... I mean, for me, the reason we're here is because of Digong. Because Digong spoiled the Chinese. And most likely, he gave them some gentleman's agreement talaga kung saan akala ng mga Chino, tapos ng laban, they pocketed the Philippines. I trust China more than Digong on this issue when they claim there was a gentleman's agreement. So, my sense is the Chinese are having a tantrum moment. They're really disappointed. But as we discussed in a previous episode, hindi lang ito usapin ng anong nangyayari sa West Philippine Sea.
Why can't we stand up to China on our own?
The Philippines Armed Forces is barely half of what Malaysia or Vietnam can deploy at this point. China will have zero respect for us if we have no backup whatsoever. And if not for the Mutual Defense Treaty, they would have already engaged in what they call short, sharp war, like what they did to Vietnam in 1988. We have to have no illusions. The reason why the Chinese are
China
using
will always
gray
be
zone...
strong. It doesn't matter if Vietnam is stronger than us, but China will always be stronger than Indonesia, Vietnam,
Sure,
Malaysia, everybody else.
but we don't even meet the minimum threshold yet. Kaya ang argument ko is, i-leverage mo yung US alliance mo, but don't get too much into the US camp.
So that's my point, Richard. Isn't that precisely the problem? The way we're leveraging the US.
If tomorrow, go and
the
take
bottom line here is that... Yes,
Patrick,
Ronald.
when the tensions happened in 2012, the Americans weren't even here. There was no EDCA then. No? Nagsampa tayo ng kaso sa UNCLOS because the Chinese started building their artificial islands within our maritime territory. There were no Americans then. When we filed the case in UNCLOS, no, wala. Yung abogado natin na kasama dito sa UNCLOS case, ito yung nagsampa ng kaso laban sa US for Nicaragua. So, from the start, we weren't leveraging the Americans. Dahil nauna yung China.
Precisely to that point. It is possible to stand up to China on our own because we did it in 2012.
Yes, pero ang nangyari, nagabansi sila. they established these artificial islands. At hindi natin napigilan dahil nga wala tayong pantapat. No, kaya nagsampa tayo ng kaso sa UNCLOS. We invoke international law.
So
Ang sinasabi ko lang, Patrick,
are you telling me, Ronald?
nung simula, we never leveraged the Americans.
So Ronald, are
Hindi
you telling
natin
me that
leverage.
EDCA is a consequence of that, trying to really leverage the Americans? That's why we're allowing more EDCA sites for the Americans here on Philippine soil.
Linawin natin, Patrick, that was after the Chinese built their artificial islands within our territory. No? Ang diplomatic solution sana dyan, yung tinatanong kanina ni Edwin Gao, ay pwede ba nating balikan yung nakaraan na pare-parehas tayong nangingisda dito, pare-parehas tayong dumadaan, no? Nang walang isang bansa na i-claim ito arbitrarily, like dun sa artificial islands na ginawang military bases. Pag tinignan mo yung artificial islands, these are military bases with missiles, with submarines, with runways,
Ronald,
with
pero
fighter jets.
I think I remember,
medyo malayong sa atin, ha?
Yeah, but
Medyo
Ronald, I also remember, once upon a time,
yun ang sinasabi ko na from the very start, wala tayong leveraging na ginawa.
but Ronald, I also remember once upon a time, Ronald, during the time of Gloria Arroyo, there was more cooperation happening. Of course, you might be critical of that kind of cooperation that was being done with China. And sorry, I know you were part of the Pinoy administration, but it seems things turned quite nasty starting from that time.
Well,
From the
Patrick,
time
you
of,
forgot Mischief Reef. We lost Mischief Reef in 1994, 1995.
During Ramos'
where the
time.
Americans left. Just 2-3 years after Americans left their bases, immediately the Chinese came in. That should have been a wake-up call that we cannot trust China, and that should have been also a wake-up call that we cannot stand on our own. We had the next 20 years to build up our capabilities. We didn't. At the same time, our alliance with the U.S. was also... So you had this very toxic situation of
Ronald,
Philippines not
Richard,
building
we
its
can keep coming
capabilities.
back to how the different countries
Patrick, I'm
started
showing
grabbing
you that
islands and-
everything that we're doing is in response to China. Why are we gaslighting ourselves?
No,
we are
don't
arguing
use
it
words
for
like
China.
gaslighting or disinformation.
We are gaslighting ourselves.
No.
Everything we do is in response
This
to what
is a
China
discussion,
is.
Richard. We need to
gaslighting?
challenge ideas here.
Yeah.
We're journalists here. We're not supposed
I'm
to
all
agree
good.
with you.
I'm good,
so
Patrick.
This
I
is
debate
this is our
every
only
day.
function here is to
I-
challenge your ideas also.
That's what I'm saying. I think we let's not forget when it started is when China occupied the Mischief Reef. Everything else is just reactive. Patrick, in theory, I wanted us to have armed forces as powerful as Vietnam, armed forces even just as powerful as Malaysia, and then work this out. Pero wala na tayo dyan eh. Andyan na yung alliance. So make the most use out of it. At the same time, don't get over-dependent on the Americans. It's a doable thing. The Koreans have their own headaches with the Chinese. They have their own maritime problems with China in Yellow Sea. The Japanese are US ally. They also have their problems. So my point is, ang problema sa Pilipinas is always either or. Itapon natin ang Amerikano, dun tayo sa province of China. When reality is always in this 50 shades in the middle. That's what mature strategy is all about. Otherwise, kaya sabi ko, di talaga tayo mag-grow as a country kung hanggang, ano ba tayo, Team US, Team China. No, we should be Team Philippines. And as Team Philippines, how do we make the most? Turkey is a NATO member, and yet they play footsie with Russians and Chinese from a position of strength.
Exactly, Richard.
We can do the same
Exactly,
thing.
Richard. But it doesn't seem that relying on MDT is playing both sides. It doesn't seem that way.
Well, the MDT is still not a final story. As we saw here, we can still tweak it, we can still improve it.
Allowing EDCA doesn't seem to be playing both sides.
I think
it looks more like not standing up on our own, not playing both sides, but pivoting to the embrace of the Americans.
The EDCA kasi, the thing is, there's an EDCA that has to do something with counterterrorism, there's an EDCA that has to do something with West Philippine Sea, and then there's an EDCA that has something to do with Taiwan. Kaya nga medyo komplikado ito, hindi ito clear-cut. Kaya sabi ko, pwede mo i-calibrate yung some parts, yung other parts na relevant sa atin, you keep it together. Again, it's about how you also slice our own salami. This is what strategic, this is what a mature strategic discussion is. It's not an either-or issue. It's about what mixtures, it's like martial arts, what mixtures of techniques you put together to get the best possible outcome. Again, it's not the end of the story. We haven't lost Second Thomas Shoal. Wala pang namatay. We fortified our Second Thomas Shoal. So I think we should be proud of what we have achieved so far too.
Para sa akin, hindi yung MDT yung main eh. Ako, kaya nga tinatawag ko kanina na yung transparency tactic is a cup half full. Dahil doon nasasaktan ang China. It's not about the military exercises. Hindi sila nasasaktan doon. Mas nasasaktan sila yung global pressure. Mas nasasaktan sila doon sa threat sa kanilang economy. Lalo na, their economy is not in the best of shape. Ang sinasabi ko lang, hindi naman natin nilalagay yung lahat ng itlog natin sa MDT basket. Diba? Hindi yun ang ginagawa natin. Open tayo sa diplomacy, even within its limits. Pero para sa akin, ang mas malaking pressure sa China is global outrage. Ang mas malaking pressure sa China ay global economy.
Okay,
Dahil
Ronald, I meant to
yun
ask
yung,
you this,
yun yung
Ronald,
kanilang
no?
pinaka-vulnerability.
Ronald, before I turn over to Ed, I meant to ask you this. The first time you mentioned it, that you're hoping that measure transparency will apply some global pressure on China. You think that's possible for a one-party communist state to care about global opinion in the conduct of its policy?
Yes, dahil ang pinagbabatayan ngayon ng Communist Party of China are not the proletariat, no? They're not even the peasants. Ang pinagbabatayan ngayon ng buong foundation ng Chinese Communist Party is the 500 million Chinese middle class. Diyan sila takot, no? Diyan sila takot. At yan yung vulnerable sa economic global pressures, no? Diyan sila takot eh. No? Ang Communist Party of China, galit nga sa kanilang mga trade unions, galit nga sa proletariat. China is the strike capital of the world.
Ronald, last I
kanilang
checked,
measurement, whether Chinese society will survive, ay yung 500 million middle class.
But Patrick, China
ito yung
wants to
what's
be a global
holding
leader too.
Chinese society together. Yan yung,
And
dyan sila nakikinig.
Ronald, let's not forget, China
Dyan sila
wants to be a
nakikinig.
leader too, and leadership is not just having brawn, it's about authority, it's about respect, it's about trust. So, I don't know, the Cambodians and Laos of this world, they probably really love China, but there are many fence-sitters here.
Singapore is playing both sides.
Oh, playing both sides, but actually almost all of their armed forces is from Germany, NATO, and US.
Right.
So what I'm saying here is, China cares also about its reputation because it wants to peel away Mexico and Turkey and Singapore and Malaysia down the road, all away from the United States. And they won't be able to do that if they're seen as an all-out bully and a kind of a rogue state. So it does matter,
You
their
think these
reputation.
countries, Mexico, Brazil, let's put in Singapore, you think it's a deal breaker for them in dealing with China that there's bullying happening in the West Philippine Sea?
Honestly, Patrick,
Is it in the national interest of Singapore?
It's not a question of national
or
the fact
India
that-
or Brazil?
But Patrick, this is not about sentiments and love.
Exactly.
This is
It's about national interest. So I was wondering, you think India is going to say, we're going to stop trading because China is bullying the Philippines and the West
You
Philippines?
see, when the best parallel we can find is Russia. After Russia invaded Ukraine, the Vietnams and Indias of this world stood by Russia diplomatically by not condemning it. But quietly behind the scenes, at least the Indians are diversifying. On paper, they're still good with Russia. They'll still invite Putin. But behind the scenes, they're developing engines of aircrafts with Boeing. They're getting cyber technology here and there. And
They're
Vietnam,
benefiting.
They're benefiting, but actually
you're-
slowly they're moving away from Russia, and the same thing also with the Vietnamese. For now, ipit sila kasi legacy to eh. But you see, there's a cost to it eh. So if China does something crazy here, it's not that they care about the Philippines. Yung tiwala nila sa China, believe me or not, they actually have confidence in China. And China may not have shown us their good side, but China has a good side. I'll argue China has provided good benefits to a lot of countries around the world. Those countries are still thinking
Richard,
baka China is the future. So if they do something crazy here, the
Exactly.
fence-sitters will say, Meiji, parang ayoko na bumili sa China ng mga advanced armaments. This is Emiratis, this is Singaporeans, this is the Mexicans, this is the Turks. These are
That's
countries
what
which
I
are
was talking
flirting
about,
with
Richard.
China, but they're
Yeah.
still 100% not sure. So, and China is not Russia. Xi Jinping is not Putin. He's far more rational. He's far more reasonable. China is a rising power. Russia is a declining power. So I think sometimes we over-demonize China and sometimes we over-romanticize China. China, in my opinion, is a rational rising power and responds to pressure and incentive. That's my approach. I think the problem
That's
with all
what I
other
was talking
arguments is
about,
that they
Richard,
either over-demonize China or think China is all nice and dandy and there's
So you
something wrong.
shouldn't use the word gaslighting.
That's-
when there are ideas and views or questions that are no.
Richard,
Or use the word misinformation.
Not
No?
you. It's
Or
the
China
argument.
narrative.
The
About
argument.
earlier.
You know,
No,
because
yung
we need to hear all these
vulnerability
No,
ng
things.
this is not misinformation
Alam
at
mo,
all.
We need to hear all this things,
No,
Richard,
it's not,
right?
it's not.
Alam mo,
Gaslighting,
saan
because
takot
we
ang
still not
China?
blame ourselves if we're the
Alam mo, saan
victims.
takot ng China? Yung pinag-uusapan natin just now. Yung diversification away from China. No? Ang tawag nila dyan, the Walmart strategy. Walmart was 90-95% dependent on China before.
Okay.
Ngayon, 90% ng Walmart nag-diversify na away from China towards
Mexico.
India,
Yeah, Mexico.
Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and even
Ba't walang
Indonesia.
Pilipinas,
So
ano?
the diversification, dyan
Ronald, ba't walang
takot ang China.
Pilipinas? What kind of an
My
ally
S-
from the
my
United
S-
States? Walang Pilipinas.
Sinasabi ko, Patrick,
Dun sa ano?
dyan takot ang China.
Ha?
Dyan takot sila economically mag-diversify yung mundo away from their supply chain.
I know, Ronald, but you know we're sacrificing a lot. How come walang diversification dito sa Pilipinas?
Wala naman tayo sinasacrifice na kwan dahil ang kwan lang naman natin sa China, cheap products eh. Di ba? Yun lang naman natin, the shoe mart.
You're saying
It's
that
just
American
shoe mart.
companies are moving out of China, they're moving to all these other countries. They should move to the Philippines.
Well, ang problema natin, mas internal
Walang kuryente.
Hindi
Yan.
natin dinevelop ang ating manufacturing
Pangit infrastructure,
industry.
yeah.
Mas yun ang problema natin.
Yeah.
Itong mga bansang ito, dinevelop yung kanilang manufacturing at industry. Look at Vietnam. Vietnam kalaban ng China. Diba? Pero dinevelop nila yung kanilang education, dinevelop nila yung kanilang
Education
manufacturing, dinevelop nila yung kanilang
Security.
services, etc. Kaya ngayon, sila pinupuntahan. Yung lagi natin pinag-uusapan, Patrick, na comparative advantage,
Right.
comparative advantage.
I just
Yun
asked a
yung kulang
question
sa
para
atin.
masagot mo yan
At ito
ganyan.
ay,
Right.
at
Para
ito hindi,
mapaliwanag mo.
hindi ito problema ng ating relasyon
Okay.
sa US.
Sige.
Problema ito ng ating gobyerno.
Okay.
Moving
At hindi
forward,
ko, at linawin natin hindi ko binanggit ang gaslighting
Oy, grabe naman, na-trigger kayong lahat.
Okay. Moving forward, how do we slice our salami this time? Hindi natuloy yung resupply, yung Rore. It was a failure. The last Rore was a failure. What are the options on the table now as far as, for example, very tactical question. How do we resupply this time?
Chopper. Let's use
But
chopper.
the last time we did that, they confiscated
Marami pa
the
tayong
equipment.
pwedeng gamitin yung inflatable fast food. Actually, my recommendations yung US, ang dami nilang pinaparetire na littoral combat ships, mga corvettes. Bigay na nila sa Pilipinas. So this is where I'm very critical of US. So I think I have to be very clear.
Walang binibigay.
Wala, medyo kinakapos tayo. Hindi ko sinisisi ang ating
Walang binibigay.
administration, ha? Yeah, so we have to learn to juice. So my worry is, it's not that the U.S. alliance is a liability per se. It's how we approach that alliance and how our allies approach us, which is creating a liability. That's where diplomacy comes in. So diplomacy is not only how we deal with China, it's also how you deal
With
with,
the US.
your allies. Yeah, exactly. As Churchill said, the only worst thing than dealing with allies is not having any allies, right? So
Okay.
I love that quote. It
Okay.
really applies to us.
My other
right?
question goes back to 2012. In 2012, we also had a problem with China's response to how we were handling Scarborough Shoal. I remember banana diplomacy, our foods were rotting in Chinese ports, and then there was a cancellation of all the Chinese tourists coming here. I think they were number 2 or number 3 in terms of numbers of tourists in the Philippines. So there was a major impact in...
There's a cost. There's a cost.
There was an economic cost. And I think that's a major part of the reason why we had to turn to backdoor negotiations.
Which didn't work.
Which didn't work out.
Again, don't throw out the baby with the
Hindi naman.
bathwater.
I think there are shades to everything, no?
Yeah.
I think
You're right.
There are shades
I
to
think the
everything.
shades,
It's not
50
it's
shades
never-
din yan, yeah.
This is where I agree with Richard. It's never either
not black
or.
and white. Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
black and
Yeah,
white.
yeah.
Yeah, but that's still my question. I mean,
Yeah.
we still have that problem. If push comes to shove, delikado pa rin yung economy natin.
Well, I mean, China exports to us more than we import from China, right? There are certain sectors who are very dependent on imports from China, and I think some of them spoke out already. But I think if you look at all ASEAN countries,
Right.
we're the least exposed to China because China made no investments of,
Right.
during Duterte's time, 6 years, saan yung mga big ticket infrastructure projects? Zilch, nada, zero. Now, is that a good thing? Of course not. I want investments from China. But sana, based on a new equilibrium. For me, this is birth pains. This is a transition phase. Maybe I'm being naive. Pero ang tingin ko is if we hold our line, tweak things, do things right, in 1 to 2 years, we're going to come back and say, this was part of the growing process. This is the birth pains of a more assertive and self-reliant Philippines. Yeah.
Sabi ng producer natin, kalma na raw tayo dahil patapos na.
Sorry. Breathe in, breathe out. Yeah.
Mahirap pala pag wala ka sa studio no nagka-gaslight ka.
Sir Ronald, dapat ikaw nandyan, dapat nandun ako sa kabila. Na-trigger. May na-trigger.
Okay, teka, baka saran tayo ng tindahan. Ano?
Bigyan natin ng mga 4 more minutes. Sige. Bok.
I don't know if you guys have asked this question already in the past two, pero, di ba?
Quickly lang, Ronald, Richard.
Should the Philippines...
Gusto ko lang, Ed, gusto kong i-emphasize ulit yung Walmart framework. No, for lack of a better
Ayun
term.
na talaga
No?
yung tip.
Ang sabi nila, it cannot be done. It can be done. We can diversify, no? The world can diversify away from China. And that is a vulnerability of China more than the Mutual Defense Treaty, more than military exercises.
Okay.
Siyempre, nakakadagdag yan, nakakatulong yan. Pero the economy, no? It's the economy, stupid. Sabi nga ni Clinton. No? Yun yung mahalaga. At halimbawa, bumaba ng 2 percentage points yung economy ng China. Imagine mo yung gulo sa loob ng China. Imagine mo yung gulo within the Communist Party. Imagine mo yung gulo doon sa 500 million middle class ng China. Doon takot ang China.
Okay, Ronald, ito na lang.
Kaya hindi ito usapin lamang ng military capabilities. Usapin ito ng economy.
Okay, Ronald, ito na lang. For closing, is an unstable China more dangerous than a stable China? Kasi you mentioned, di ba, pag bumagsak yan, baka some states that crumble cause more problems for its neighbors.
Pag nag-collapse ang China, magmamigrate yung kalahati ng kanilang populasyon papunta sa US at saka papunta sa Australia at saka papunta sa Europe. Yun yung magiging disruption.
Walang pupunta dito.
Wala. Nandito na sila eh.
Supugo na. Okay. Richard, ikaw. Last word.
No, I mean, for all of, don't press the panic button. This is a journey, we just have to hold each other's hands as we go through this. Diba? We can tweak it. We're fortifying positions on the ground. We lost no territory so far, no casualties so far. I think the Americans are coming under pressure to show their reliability. I think the Chinese, despite everything, also realize that they don't want to escalate it too much to make it deadly and bloody. So I take a much more sanguine view of what's happening right now. I think this is just a process and transition. Is there risk? Of course there's risk. But without risk, there's no reward. And how are you going to be a real country if you're not going to take any risk at all? But for me, this is a process.
Ang tagal ng reward, Richard eh.
Well, not losing anything is a good reward.
No, I mean the US has, we're not feeling anything.
Well, US is a
because I remembered in your
mess.
interview. Ito na lang, you have a few more minutes. I remember in your interview with Ambassador to the US, Babes Romualdez, he said, it's going to be dramatic. The improvements and the increased capability of the armed forces will be dramatic in the coming years. We haven't seen any of that.
Sadly, it's a years-long process. But the good news is the Philippine Coast Guard is going to get some big ones, not from US, but from Japan.
We're buying. We're paying for those.
Of course.
We're paying for those.
We're a richer country. We're becoming an upper middle income country.
But
We're
it's always better to get something free.
But we have to get the free ones. Kaya in a new piece coming out with Nikkei Asia, my argument
We're
is
giving them access to a basis. There should be some
the bargaining is
rebate for
give
that.
them minimal base, get maximum aid. Hindi yung opposite na give them everything, get nothing. So again, that's why it's not binary. It's really a negotiation process.
Okay, pinapalis na tayo.
Pinapalis na. Bakit nyo kasi sinama ni Ronald at ako, hindi talaga matatapos ng discussion na ito. This is a free flow.
Okay, pinapalis na tayo ng China. Well, thank you for joining us, Storycon.
Pero Richard,
Ayan na.
Sige.
Ayan,
Last word. Final
monitor
word.
mo ngayon medyo delikado yung Shandong strike force, carrier strike force na gumagalaw ngayon. It's moving and everybody is monitoring it. That's the entire South China fleet of China.
Okay.
Yung Shandong
You tried to
naman-
end positively. Ronald wants to end this show with some gloom. Anyway, thanks for joining the story
Sinira mo
today.
naman yung ko.
Geopolitical
Ganda
analyst
sana.
Richard Darian and Ronald Llamas, Storycon's resident political pundit.
Join us again on Monday at 4 p.m. for the Storycon. I'm Ed Lingao.
I'm Patrick Paez. We are One News, all sides, all the time. This is the Story Conference Group or the Storycon Group.